guys, we can start now. Scott Brown's here.
I think I recognize.
I got to get in front of where I can see.
So you can hear me. I recognize most people. Glen Harris, Soil Fertility, here in Tifton. Been here since 1994, which that's going to come up in my talk. Normally we kind of shotgun approach, talk about all kinds of things fertility, but I'm going to kind of focus in on and share with you a study I did the last 2 years on fertilizing by yield goal with NP and K. And then I got, we've already started county meetings, as you know, and I got about 3 questions I've already been getting from folks, and we'll kick those around too, and whatever else you have to do. We should finish up about 2:50. I got another appointment at 3, so unfortunately I'll have to hit the door pretty quick after that. Before I start, of course, my work is sponsored by Georgia Cotton Commission, and all the field work I show you, I don't do it myself. I got my crew here, can vouch for me. This stuff really does get put out. They're the ones that do all the work, sitting up here in the front row. So, and some people pick it for me too. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
You got to have a chief, you got to have some Indians.
That's right. You're gonna have some good Indians that don't mind, or else they kill the chief. That's what you don't want. That's right. But I've been asking the question: how many people at farm grew cotton before 1994? And you don't grow, but I know you've been around that long.
79.
Yeah, since '79. There you go. But one of the significance about that was the year I started. You know, back then we had one recommendation for one yield goal. It was 60 pounds of N for 750 pound of lint, and a bale and a half. Back then, if on our test report form, it was just a line with numbers. We didn't make pretty bar graphs or anything else. And you know, that's a pretty interesting time because we had just gotten out of boll weevil eradication program. But you remember, transgenics didn't officially hit till '96, but that was when we were really taking off. And not just because we got some county agents in the room, but I say this every time. I really give the credit to the county agents at the time, because all of a sudden, you know, they had growers that were making, you know, all of a sudden we're making some 3-bale cotton legit, and they're saying, surely that must take a little more fertilizer. How much? So I'm not going to show you the data that we did to make these recommendations, but we did a lot of on-farm trials, and we did some experiment station trials too. And just to show you, I could update these slides, but I kind of like showing these just to show how old they are. This is a scan of a 35 millimeter slide. That shows you how long ago this was done. But this is probably around, I don't know, 98, 99 maybe, Scott. I don't remember what exact year we changed them. I know it was before 2000. But there's your 750 pound lint yield goal, 60 pounds of nitrogen. And you notice we just went up 15 pounds for every half bale. So for 2 bale, 75, 2.5, 90, and for 3 bale, 105. You know, not huge increases. But of course, 60 to 105 sounds really big, but when you're going up and making that kind of cotton, I don't think so. A lot of people don't think you can make 3 bale and 105 pounds of N. And granted, sometimes it might take a little more. You know, it depends on soil type, rotation, rainfall, etc., and how you split it and what you use. All those things factor in. But you know, you can make 3 bale and 105. I've done it. But I was in a conversation yesterday with my new counterpart in Alabama, Audra Gamble, and she said, you know, like what's the top end? And I normally tell people I don't mind being up around 120. Especially if you're splitting it. But if you're putting on more than 120, you're probably battling something else, or not using what you're supposed to, or not putting it out, you know, split applications or etc. But we can talk about more about that later. P and K, the recommendations, it depends on where you are in the soil, how much you have in the soil. The lower line, this is 750, that's the original line. And you notice that the less you have in the soil, the bigger the differences are with how much you're going to have to put on to make the higher yield goals. But as you build your soil test where you should be, those lines come together. So that's the phosphorus line, and there's the potassium line. And to be honest with you, again, not huge differences. A lot of that's based on removal, I can tell you. And I don't normally talk a lot about removal and fertilizing on removal, because you know, it depends on where you start in soil and all that. But I'll tell you that to say that really, before we did this work the last 2 years, I didn't really expect to see a whole lot of differences in the yield and the yield results. I thought I was really nervous, to be honest with you. I said, you know, this is going to come out kind of flat. And I didn't tell you also, another reason we came about to test these yield goal recommendations is we had just done the work on corn. So we had it took us longer on corn because we only had one location to work with. So we had 5 years of corn data, and we tested our fertilizing by yield goal. Those recommendations have been on the book before I got here. They've been on there forever. And you know, you're looking at our base of 150 bushel corn, 200, 250, and 300. And we got some pretty good data, and corn responds well to things like NP and K. I wasn't sure what cotton was going to do, and keep that in mind. So what we did, 2017 and 18, we had 5 locations. RDC pivot across the street here on a Tifton soil, good rotation. All these sites are irrigated. Sunbelt Expo Moultrie, that's a Dothan soil type, if you know your soil types. Stripling Irrigation Park in Camilla, that was our only deep sand, that's on a Lucy deep sand. Lang Farm in Tifton, not too far up the road, just probably, 5 miles or less. Tifton soil. And then Attapogus in the southwest corner state. That soil type is similar to Expo, it's probably a Dothan type soil. All center pivot irrigated, went with the same variety to take that out of the picture. You can see the details there. These are small plots fertilized by hand to make sure we got exactly what we need, the differences in the recommendations. So this is the treatment list. This is what we did. We went 750 to 1500, so 3 bale. And that's where our recommendations currently stop. But we also put 3.5 and 4 bale on there. And why did we do that? Because some growers starting a couple years ago at county meetings and county agents said, hey, we got some spots that are making 4 bale. How much fertilizer does that take? And Philip Roberts and I kid around all the time. You know, until you get data, what do you tell people? And what I was telling people when they said, how much fertilizer does it take for 4 bale? I would just tell them, well, fertilize for 3 bale and put a little more, all right? So, and you know, that doesn't sound real good and real extension research based, but as it turns out, that's really not a bad answer. And now we can kind of tell you exactly how much. Because you see the numbers here, this is what we ended up putting out. And again, we varied the NP and K for each treatment, so we can't separate out the effects. We can't tell you if it was from the nitrogen, the phosphorus, or the potassium. We can make some guesses, and I'll show you a nitrogen-only trial when we're done. But it's all together. But you notice the nitrogen range from 30 to 105. Why is that number 30? We were following peanuts in all the cases, or heavily fertilized corn, so that's why that number's there. So that's a pretty good spread, 30 to 105. Phosphorus, it's not that big a difference, 50 to 70. And then the potash, look, it goes from 80 to 120, so pretty decent spread if you look at that. There's your increases by every half bale increase in yield goal, and there's the cost of the fertilizer based on last year's prices. Again, not that big of price differences, yeah.
Were any of these on strip till with cover crop, or was all in fairground?
Let me think about that. I know Moultrie last year was conventional, Attapogus was conventional. Where did we end up? We got strip till and conventional across the street. We ended up putting it in the strip till, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the RDC pivot is strip till. Yeah, good question. You'll be interested to see the nitrogen too, because we did strip till versus conventional. I'll show you that. Yeah, you'll be interested in that. But you know, again, a couple things with this. You know, this is not a huge, input going from each half bale step, and it's not that much fertilizer either. I think some people, as soon as they hear we're fertilizing by increased yield goal in Georgia, we're putting too much fertilizer on and polluting and everything. And I don't see that much. That's not, yeah, it adds up, but if you're making more yield too, then obviously the plant's getting some and you're not polluting the environment. We could talk about that some too if you want. How exactly did we put this out? We actually used 5, 10, 15 Rainbow. It's got some micronutrients in it. We use that as our base to start with. And then we adjust the phosphorus with 0.460 or the potassium with 0.060. These guys are well calibrated. After you do 1,000 plots, you get pretty good at spreading evenly. And then we adjusted the nitrogen. In the past, we've used a lot of liquids like 28, mostly 28.005, but last couple of years we've been using 40.005.5 Amidas, which is a Yarrow product. It's urea and ammonium sulfate in homogenized blend. and it spreads good, a little quicker, a little faster. Those seem to do fine. So again, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, what it was going to look like in the field, but this is the data from 2017. And a couple things struck you right away. One is we had a pretty big difference top to bottom on yield levels in these locations, a little more than I wanted. I wish they were all up here. And then also the general shape of the graphs, they're not super clean and they bounce around, but overall, if you draw the lines, they're general increases. So overall, it seemed to, the more fertilizer, higher yield goal you shot for, you did increase yield. Now, whether it covered the cost of fertilizer, that's the big question, right? And we're going to get to that. So, but if you look at it top to bottom, the higher yielding plots, the RDC pivot across the street, that is kind of our brag patch. Good soil, good rotation. We're up there a little above 3.5 bale. Expo's the next site, that's up around 3 bale at the top end. Stripling's really interesting. In 2017, look at that spot in the middle. It was almost linear. So think about if you had fertilized for 1250 versus 3.5 bale, so 2.5 and 3.5 bale. That's a big difference. What happened to Lang and Anapogas? Why are they so low? Didn't even make 1,000 pounds. Lang Farm, we had white flies. Remember that, David? That was a bad year for white flies. Weren't able to control those. And then Anapogas, we actually planted in May and got wiped out by rain. I think they had like 3 or 5 inches on a weekend rain, and just our cotton was basically in the ditch. So we had to replant it, and it never really covered. So
did y'all change y'all's pigs based on?
great. I was surprised I didn't get that question this morning, because I almost always get that question. So how do we fix or growth regulate this? It's really hard to do them separate. So what we do is kind of split the difference, because, and really, you think about it, if we were too aggressive with picks, it would really hurt the lower ones, and that's what you don't want to do. You can get away with a moderate rate of picks, and the top end will still. So that's what we did. We kind of just did a kind of a moderate pixing kind of standard program. Good question. We also pick it all at the same time, and I can tell you that the lower fertilization rates, they were open well before these were out here, but that's just not much you can do about that either. It's really tricky to do. I'll put it this way, I haven't figured out how to do that yet, so without doing a lot of extra work. But what you can do with this is interesting. I'm not an economist, but if so the way I look at things is, did I get my money back? Return on investment, if you will. So what I've done is, this is just the one site, the RC Pivot in 2017. If you look at how much more cotton you made going from fertilizing for a bale and a half to 2.5 to, or 1.5 to 2 bales here, you made 295 pounds of lint. By the way, this was all machine picked and then put through the microgen. So we have official turnouts on this to make the yields. So 295 pounds of lint. I just picked the value of 70 cents per pound of lint. So that's $206 worth of cotton. I spent $9.10 on fertilizer. You do the math, you made $196. I think that's pretty good. I think everybody would take that. Had a little flat line up at the next step, only came out to about $20 to the good, but then here got another jump, spend $9.10 between here and here and make 118. And this is one of the only sites that you got above 3 bale, it did not pay to fertilize above 3 bale. And I really probably should stop there and tell you our recommendations are good and you don't need to be above 3 bale, but that would be lying to you or hiding data. But this is a high, and it probably has something also to do with this being already a high-end yielding site. Because, for example, you just take this one, the next highest yielding site that year was Expo. And again, I don't know why we get these little jagged, kind of bumps in the road. But here, that first step, we didn't gain a lot, but here we did. Lost some here, but gained some here, and then it did go up at the end. So even the 3.5 and 4 bale, we were still gaining. So I think that's kind of interesting. Again, I think the bottom line is, even when you fertilize for a higher yield goal and don't make it, a lot of times the fertilizer cost is being covered. It's kind of interesting. Stripling was the only one that had this spot in the middle, and if you look just the difference between fertilizing for 2.5 to 3.5 bale. It's like 300 or 600 pound of lint, like $400 worth or whatever, just in that spot there. I was really, really curious to see if this would happen again in 2018, but I'll show you that data in a second. I'll give you a hint. We're going to have to wait till next year to find out. So, Lang Farm, I think both the lower yielding environments and because we had issues, that's why this line is a little more jagged, but it came up in general. It tailed off at these higher ends also, especially that last step. And then there's Attapulgis. It had a pretty good jump in the middle and then kind of leveled off. So, you look at that and you figure, yeah, I probably should have been only about 3 bale there for that one. Even though the law, if you went any higher, you didn't gain a whole lot between you get there and there. What happens if you average them? If you average them, the line looks like this. It's not the perfect line, but it's kind of more like what you would expect. If that dot had been right there, I'd feel a little better, because that's what it kind of should look like. I'm still not exactly sure. Somebody asked me this morning. Maybe there's a physiological reason. I don't know, Scott Brown, what do you think? You think maybe for some reason at that level we're getting enough fertility to make vegetative growth but can't support it or something? I don't know. You can make up anything you want actually, but I'm not really sure why that bump is. But the overall, you can see comes up here. So if you do the average, and this is a straight average I show you, and do the numbers like we just talked about, this is how it comes out. And this is interesting because you basically are, besides that flat spot there, are gaining, return on investment all the way up to actually 3.5 bale. So I'm waiting for that question to come out. Somebody's going to say, well, should I be fertilizing for 3.5 instead of putting a little on? Truth be told, a lot of people are probably doing that anyway right now, let's face it. So I'm not too worried about that. I think really the bottom line shows you, you'd rather be up here than back here. And the good news is that most of the time when we're fertilizing, we're covering it with increased yield. That was 2017. What happened in 2018? Really asterisk year as we talk about. I'm going to have to put an asterisk on this one to talk about it. REC Pivot and Expo were the only two sites we were able to plant on time before the rains in May came, and they were harvested on time before the hurricane. And then here's Lang Farm, and if you remember, Lang Farm, it did better, but it's kind of a flattish line, but it did better last year. Attapulgis, believe it or not, survived the hurricane because it still had the leaves on it, but we weren't able to pick it till about a week before Christmas, I think. So you know how that cotton's been coming out. And where's Stripling? You can't see it, right? It's right there. It's literally on the ground, unfortunately. And when you think about it, Attapulgis is there, and I'm not real good with my directions, but Attapulgis is there. We're up here in Tifton, and Camilla. You would think that the Attapulgis site would have been wiped out and not Camilla. But why is that? The Camilla site, we actually planted on time, and it was fully open, and it just looked like this. And I don't have to tell you what that looks like. We saw more of that than we wanted to this year. Tell you an interesting side story. We called Calvin Perry or something. He said, all your cotton's on the ground. And we got into this discussion, because these are small plots, you remember, 4 rows wide but 30 foot long, all next to each other. And we said, well, if the hurricane dropped them straight to the ground, maybe you could pick it up off the ground. And I said, no, I ain't going to do that. These guys said, no, we ain't going to do that. And that's probably a good thing. I had a colleague that actually did do that. He took about, 6 people down there, picked it up off the ground, and come to find out, he said, there was only about half the cotton that should have been there was there. And he said, yeah, the other half is in the woods or, in the next county or somewhere. So not only that, but what happened with this site, I don't know if it happened everywhere, but in Camilla, 2 days after the hurricane, they got about, 2 inches of rain. And you remember, it was really warm after the hurricane. It was like 85 degrees. So we went out there about a week later after we felt a little guilty, because that guy picked his up, and went out there and said, we'll rake a little bit up and try to see. Well, then it looked like this. So it had germinated. So I don't think that data made any sense. I'm glad we didn't do more than a couple square yards. Yeah, I hear you.
The only thing I
idea of what fertility will get back from all that lymph we lost? It's just-
I do. That's one of my third, county agent or county meeting question we'll finish up. Yep, good question. Yep. But to finish this up, there's your 4 location average from 2018. It's more of a straight line, which is kind of interesting. That's not as flat as it looks, because this scale goes to 0, because you're going from 900 to 1200. If I blew this part of the scale up, that would be more impressive, but that's more of a linear, and if you put the numbers on it from last year, you basically never, and I think this has to do with the kind of year we had. We had a lot of folks replacing fertilizer they thought leached, et cetera, both N and K especially. And this might not happen every year, but last year, basically the more, if you fertilize a little more, you got a little more yield, and it paid and it covered itself. If you do 9 locations, again, we didn't get stripling last year, but if you average the 9 locations over 2 years, it looks like this. Again, something must be going on to still have that little blip right there. But the other interesting thing I think here is that, again, going up above 3.5 bale, consistently, you're not gaining a whole lot. You're only gaining about $2. So I still feel pretty comfortable with 3 bale right now, maybe a little more, 3.5. Don't need to do anything crazy, and I think we'll be good there. Any questions on that before I leave it? You go to Alabama or Florida and say you're fertilizing my yield goal, they'll look at you like you're crazy. I don't know if they have that concept. Florida's really worried about the environmental issues. Alabama doesn't have as much irrigation, so they're not making as high yields. So they question a lot of this and think we're doing crazy stuff, but ask them where their data is, too. I'll just leave it at that. I forgot it was being recorded. Oh, well. I didn't cuss yet, at least. I got time. She said I got time. She knows me too well. All right, so real quick, I'll show you this one because you were asking about nitrogen. Across the street, we have, it's a 12-acre pivot. We've got it separated in quadrants. We rotate corn, cotton, peanuts, and soybeans. And we actually, back in 2000, split each of those quarter sections into strip till and conventional. And we've been maintaining that way. And the reason this kind of study came about is because, especially Dr. Philip Roberts and I noticed that a lot of times the conventional looked like it wasn't doing as well, the cotton on the conventional side, and it looked like maybe it wasn't getting enough nitrogen. And there is a theory, once you start and stay in strip till a long time, you don't build your organic matter a lot, but you build it enough to get a little extra nitrogen. So that's kind of what we want to test it, and we're thinking maybe 30 pounds or so. But what was really interesting, this is a straight nitrogen trial now, 0, 30, 60, 90, 120, and 150. And this is in 2017, and the strip tills here, you notice we did get a little above 4 bale and drop back to 4 there, but the conventional paralleled it but never caught it. So if it was a nitrogen effect, you would have thought the conventional would have caught it at one point, but it never did. So it must be something else going on out there, we think, than nitrogen. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Of course, the reason you just don't rely too much on 1 year's data, we decided to do it again last year, and guess what? It looked like this. This will leave you scratching your head a little too, because, and we noticed this, we noticed the strip till didn't quite look as good as the conventional on some of these. And you got to remember, we had a lot of rain in May. It was a different year last year. So basically how you look at it now, there's your conventional, and this is your strip till. At the lower end rates, the conventional actually did better. They crossed exactly at the 90-pound rate. So if you put 90 pound on either one, it didn't matter. You ended right there. But then look at this. The strip till went up above, so at the higher end rates, the strip till did better. Something was going on where it looked like nitrogen was more limiting to the strip till last year. So we're going to do it again and have a tiebreaker this year to see what happens. Again, it's got a lot of work. We have to put all this out by hand, but it's, and by the way, Wes Porter has a grad student I'm kind of sharing, and he's flying a drone over. We're taking pictures, taking tissue samples, and trying to relate all that too. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Any questions on that? So, kind of open up for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and anticipate. We've already started some county meetings, and 3 questions I'm already getting. One is this one: does the wet weather affect my soil sampling? Good question. And this has come up before. You got to remember, this isn't the first wet winter we've had. It happens to us. My biggest concern is pH, and the issue there is that with all this rain, it leaches the salt out of the soil, and that affects how the actual measurement, when you have it measured in the lab. And what can happen is you can actually get a false high, and it measures higher than it should be. A lot of people say, yeah, but they dry out the soil sample as soon as you send it to them. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The salts have already been leached out of the sample, and even when you go to dry it, they're not going to magically appear. In fact, what do you do about it? You know, if you go back and sample it after it dries out, it still might, because it takes a while for the salts to come back. There's a couple things you can do. One is, I think UGA is the only lab we actually measured it in salt. We think it takes that effect away. So you could double check yourself against UGA. Probably the next best thing to do, if you're not going to do that, is basically look at your history and look at the samples the last time you sampled them. And what I would tell you is to look out for is if, for example, if you had a pH of 6 last year and you didn't lime, and all of a sudden it says you have a 7, that's a red flag. I think that shows you something's going on. And it can be that high. Somebody asked me the other day, said it can be a full point difference? Yeah, it can with this. That's how much it kind of messes it up. So that's what I would do, is I would look for those situations. Because think about it, that's a bad situation to be in if you're actually a 6 and it's telling you you have a 7 and you don't lime, you're a 6 now, you put some nitrogen out next year, now you're below 6. So it could be a problem. It should not affect P and K, beyond the fact that it's just hard to get a good sample. Representative samples should not affect P and K. And yes, potassium moves down with water, but it's not as leachable as nitrogen. And you know, the whole thing about soil sampling is taking the soil sample to top 6 or 8 inches, maintaining good levels in that. So yeah, if the potassium happens to move down below that, take your soil sample, we'll catch that, we'll put it back. Hopefully that potash might have moved down, but not totally away. I mean, cotton roots go down hopefully 3 feet or so. So it's not the end of the world, but that's how the system works. So if you can get a good soil sample, hopefully it'll dry out enough to get a good soil sample between here and when we plant, you'll be all right. Any questions on that?
So should we be taking into consideration these false highs when looking at samples? Because I've noticed that pHs are higher. And I am talking to different ones who thought it may be the more water is dissolving residual lime in the soil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I don't think that's what's going on. Yep.
We took it in December and then go back in January, 1st February, and there's a big difference in
Yeah.
pH right there.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ed. I should have that slide in here. That reminds me. If you measure pH in water like most people are doing, it varies naturally. It's at its lowest point in the fall, but it already comes up in January. So I mean, you can have a pH if you do nothing and you know, take out the wet. What it actually has to do with the rainfall and all that, but you know, not extremely wet or whatever. You could have a 6.0 in November, and it'll say you have a 6.2 or 6.3 in, you know, yeah, it naturally varies. Good point. But I'd watch out for them. I mean, it gets me nervous when I'm around, you know, when I'm around 6 too. You don't want to drop below 6 much. How about this one? And this, you know, is going to occur more southwest of here probably, but I've been getting this question. Should I spread hurricane debris on my cotton land? You know, they're taking all this log, trees and limbs and all that and grinding it up. We got these big mulch piles. And I've been getting calls by county agents and farmers saying they want to spread it on their land. I'm just going to tell you no. I'm just saying no, okay? I don't think it's a good idea. Yeah, you might be able to get away with it, but the two things, the reason I'm going to tell you I don't think it's a good idea is that wood has got a very high carbon-nitrogen ratio. You know, if it was ground up fine, it'd be like sawdust, and it would just tie up the nitrogen in the soil. And if you put out a bunch of this mulch out there, till it in, you're probably gonna need at least 30, 50 pounds of nitrogen just to get back to ground zero, where you won't have a nitrogen problem on your cotton or something like that. The other thing is I'm gonna go look at a pile tomorrow. We passed some, I didn't think to stop and look at them, but I'm pretty sure there's some big chunks in there. I think they use a tub grinder, 2-inch screen. You know, you'll get logs that big around that long come through, and they're not gonna break down very quickly. And better than that, you know, you go to peanuts, even if you grow cotton this year and go to peanuts next year, you're not gonna put those logs through your peanut picker.
I've seen this tried, both with sawdust and chips, on a large scale. And you can't keep enough nitrogen to it.
Once it starts tying it up.
The more decomposed it is. But another thing is to consider is wood is liquid.
That's right.
That means it's just a long chain carbohydrate, so there's not anything much in it.
No, it's all carbon.
Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
It's all mostly carbon. And they try to say it's compost. In fact, it was your county one year. They tried to say it was as good as chicken litter. And we're like, there ain't no way. You know, this ain't chicken, it ain't even close. So it's not compost, it's a mulch. Two situations I've already gotten into. One is they were going to pay the grower, and apparently they were going to pay him pretty good to take it. He was going to put it on his pasture land. And, you know, as long as you don't cover up the ground where it chokes out the pasture, you know, I guess the cows will walk around it. They'll need to put a little more nitrogen on it. Another one was where they had scraped off the topsoil, and the farmer had no topsoil. And he says, I want to put it out there about a foot deep and wait, you know, 5 years or so and not grow anything. And I thought, well, you know, I guess it's worth a try. After I hung up, I realized I forgot to tell him, you know, technically it takes a long time to generate an inch of soil. You know, they say like 100 years, so 5 years ain't going to cut it.
Nitrogen on that to break
And he did mention putting some nitrogen on, but that's just an extra cost. So I don't know. I still don't think that's a real good idea. So. All right, and then the last one, which getting back to your question, Seth, had in the back, should I give a nutrient credit for mowing down 3-bale cotton? That's how the question came to me. And that's a good question. We've mowed some cotton down before, but not near as much we're going to end up mowing down this year. So I'm going to tell you the answer is should he give it credit? Maybe, but not much. How's that for a good extension answer? Okay. If you look at the textbook values, 2-bale cotton contains about a 63, 25, 31 NPK in seed lint. So I did the math, so 3 bales should be 92, 36, and 45. Sounds pretty good, right? Especially that nitrogen, 92 pounds. But you got to remember, that nitrogen isn't like the nitrogen in the bag of fertilizer. It's not all available. I'm going to guess about 25%, maybe 50 if you were lucky. But think about it, you know, 50% of 92, now you're back down there in that 45-pound nitrogen range. My gut feeling is it's going to kind of give us the equivalent effect about following peanuts. It's going to give us a little nitrogen residual because that, you know, there is nitrogen in that seed. That's where it is. And you think about it, we've never given credit to the stalks and leaves before, so why start now? Because somebody said, well, there's nutrients in the stalks and leaves. No, there's not that much. Stalks are highly carbon, etc. That's right. And lint's all, it's in the seed. That's correct.
Then when you get to seed degradation from the environment, then how does that alter germinating seed versus, I mean, I know that you're not losing K.
Yeah, and the nutrients are a little different. You know, the K probably leaches back out. But here's the other thing to think about. I don't know if I have it right here. I don't know how many people think about this, but I think a lot of people think you put a pound of phosphorus fertilizer out there, it raises your soil test unit, one unit. That's not how it works. It takes about 10 pounds of phosphorus or about 10 pounds of K to bring it up one. So now think about that. So now we're only talking about raising, you know, the K, you know, 3 or 4 points. It's not that much. So take a good soil sample. You know, you're probably going to get a little kick from the nitrogen in the seed. Hopefully that'll help you down the road, but I'm not going to, it makes me nervous to really count on it too much. So hopefully that makes sense.
I think trying to depend on that costs you more than it.
Yeah. Yeah, what they say, I'm going to save myself out of making money. That's what I'm going to do. And sometimes you got to spend money to make money. You don't want to spend money just to waste money, but sometimes you got to spend money to make money. So, yeah. Of course, you know, if you read the peanut magazine, you notice that there's a guy in Florida that says you don't get any nitrogen credit for following peanut. You believe that? You believe it? I don't know what's going on in Florida. I think that's where we need to build a wall, personally. But anyway, I didn't say that. Anybody in Florida here? I apologize, but I meant it anyway. Anyway, I don't know what's going on. I think I do know what's going on because I read that article really carefully, as you can imagine. I think he's got a flaw in his thinking as far as I think he's getting hung up on actual real pounds of N being carried over and everything. But there are some things called non-nitrogen rotation effects or fertilizer replacement values. So, yeah, it might not exactly give you 30 pounds of N, but it gives you the effect of having 30 pounds of N. Because we all know what happens when you follow cotton following peanut versus cotton following cotton. You're going to get some bumps from that peanut. Yeah.
Something I have noticed in following peanuts is that even though there's spreaders on the back of the peanut finger, the nitrogen concentration is in the
Define, that's right.
Fall out of the machine, not in the soil.
Exactly right. So if we weren't getting any boost, why is it right where that litter is kind of windrowed behind? Yeah, you know, that doesn't take a genius to figure that out. So anyway, it also brings up a good point, and I don't have that slide in here. I don't know how many years ago, I think it was before you retired, Scott, we revisited those numbers of nutrients in peanut vines. And what we found out, and one thing I didn't really think about, and again, working with the county agents really helped, is because we went out, I think you were with me then, so it wasn't that long ago, we went to some of our research plots and we raked the peanut hay up. And like you said, you really notice how many fine leaves on that. But when a farmer bales it, he doesn't get it all. In fact, in general, there's probably about 6,000 pounds of dry matter following, you know, a decent peanut crop. And you're probably only getting about half of that into those round bales. You leave a lot of those fine leaves and all that. And, you know, even to get that in the bales is a trick. You've heard the tricks. You know, you've got to go the next day in the morning with a little bit of dew helps and all that. You know, so it's tricky. So, yeah, you know, anybody tells you that you don't get a nitrogen carryover from peanuts, I'm not sure I'm going to believe anything else they say, to be honest with you. So, anyway.
Between the cover crop and the rain, it's going down.
Yeah, yeah. But that's what I had. As far as questions, I'm certainly open to the first time around we talked a little more about maybe some potassium timing and that kind of thing too. I really do believe the overall big picture that, you know, I think we're doing a decent job with nitrogen. I think we know where we need to be, doing a good job with nitrogen. We don't really have a lot of phosphorus problems. So potassium probably is our biggest challenge. And I got a question in the first session this morning, you know, why do we think that is? And I think there's a number of reasons for it. And one, some people might not have thought of or want to admit, but you know, one of the reasons is in 2008, fertilizer prices peaked. And I think we started, you know, looking at the price of potash fertilizer and kind of, and actually if you look at those when they peaked, I should have brought that slide, I don't have it in yet. When prices went up and peaked in 2008, a lot of people said fertilizer prices doubled. But actually, depending on what nutrient you look at, and actually potash went up 7 times. It was 7 times higher. Like even, you didn't have to go very far back, like 2004 to 2008, it went up. And when fertilizer prices came back down, guess what? It didn't come down as fast as things like nitrogen and phosphorus. So I think that hurt us. The other is just the nature of our soils, being so sandy, low CEC, don't hold potassium. If we lime good, we have a lot of calcium out there, there's not a lot of spots for that potash to stick on the soil. It can get away from us, so that's another issue. And then probably the new varieties. New varieties are making good yields. They demand a lot of potassium. So it kind of all adds up to, you know, if you're going to have a problem on fertility on cotton, you know, it's most likely going to be potassium. So,
Man, have y'all got any idea why fertilizer prices haven't followed gas coming back down? I mean, they stayed kind of high.
yeah, so technically, so nitrogen should be the one that follows natural gas prices because you're not only using actually natural gas as one of the ingredients to make the nitrogen fertilizer, and they're using that as their fuel source. So they should track. P&K has more to do with just, you know, global demand, supply and demand, and how many mines are open and all that stuff. But yeah, nitrogen, natural gas prices are down pretty good now. I think you would think the other, but that's where supply and demand must be kicking in or something else, because they should be down. You're right. But and Amanda, the economists are talking about how fertilizer prices are one of the only inputs that's up this year. But if you look at it, it's not like a huge increase. They're up a little, but luckily they're still fairly reasonable, I think. But makes you think about getting your money's worth and getting your dollars worth. So good point.
Glenn,
Yeah.
so you hit on something I want to go back, calcium. So on Tipton soil, where do you think you would have the threshold would be where you can start displacing calcium? I mean, just
Potassium and all that. Yeah. So the three that compete are calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And if you lime where you're supposed to, I don't know, somewhere probably between 800 and 1,000 is where I see most. And we don't see a calcium problem until we get down below like almost to 250. So we rarely should have calcium problems if we're liming in that level. And I think as long as you're 800 to 1,000 calcium and you're following your potassium recommendations, magnesium's normal, you should be fine. But when I start seeing potassium problems because of calcium, it's when you start getting the 1,500s and the 2,000s. And there's one crazy book that I swear I thought it must be a typo, but I don't think it is. There's this guy. Have you seen this book? It's called like Hands-On Agronomy. I think they show it on one of the TV shows that I don't watch, which is a good thing I don't watch those shows. I'd probably throw a brick at my TV. Recommends like 40,000 pounds of calcium. It's the same guy that recommends 20 tons of lime per acre. It's the same guy. Yeah. And he sells lime. How about that? And manganese. He sells lime and manganese, right? So, yeah, two things you're going to need if you do that. So, but yeah.
Well, on these strip tills several years, and we watched calcium levels just continue to climb.
That's probably also because, again, strip tilling, if you're raising the ability to hold those cations comes from clay and organic matter. You haven't changed your clay, but if you're building a little organic matter, you're able to hold more. And calcium gets held a little tighter. Calcium and magnesium get held tighter than potassium. Yep. That's probably why you're seeing that. Does that make sense? It's always nice when things make sense. Instead of scratching your head all the time. So, anyway. But I'll just finish with this. I said potassium's a big issue. Timing of potassium, something to think about. I like to recommend all my potash at planting. And a lot of people say, well, I like to split my potash. And it depends on how you split it, what you call splitting. Because some folks, I think, are putting a good amount of potash at planting and then putting some extra when they put their nitrogen out. And obviously, you do that, you're probably going to be all right. But I've actually, back in '98, and I need to do this again, I took the recommended potash and I put half at planting, and then I waited till I put my nitrogen out to put the other half, and I decreased yields. I forced a problem. So it kind of depends on what you call a split and how you're splitting it. But I think there is a level where you get too late. The other way that question comes up, and just yesterday it came up, is that a lot of folks they wait until they put the nitrogen out to put their first potash out. How much does that hurt us? So what we're going to do is we're going to put our recommended potash at planting, and then we're going to wait and put it out with acidulous nitrogen and see how bad that hurts us. And my guess is it's going to depend on the soil type and the yield levels and all that. But it probably does hurt us. I really do like to have my potash. And again, the way these new varieties fruit earlier, it makes sense to load them up early and make sure they have that potash out there early. So I don't like to put it out too late. All right. Any other questions? Well, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks for providing.
Yeah, man. Hope you have a good year this year, everybody, no matter what you're doing. Even you, Gib. Johnny, good to see you.
We get inundated, Scott, Johnny talking.
Yeah, I remember.
Inundated with these seed coatings. that
Treatments.
have Micronutrients. And they've got 0.000%.
The only time I've ever done one of those, I thought that was crazy. I thought I actually saw a little bump from it. And I don't know if it's because it is, even though it's small amount, it's right there by the seat or whatever. So I need to revisit that. It's a thing of the future. They're also looking at putting it on the fertilizer too. Coating N, P, and K fertilizer with different micronutrients. And I had the same issue, you know, can you get enough? You know, that kind of thing. But that,
More than you're gonna get on a seed.
yeah, probably, you're right.
There's a lot more fertilizer.
Yeah, a lot more pounds per acre. So, but at this point, I'm just gonna plead the fifth. You know. Yeah,
Cobra lotion
yeah.
is the technical term. Cobra lotion.
Cobra lotion. There you go.
You remember Charles Swan from years ago?
Yeah.
Charles was the one that taught me about Cobra lotion.
There you go. I never heard him called that.
I'm convinced,
Oop,
and I don't have any
it's still on.
credit.
Yeah.
It's just from playing with this stuff. But some of these really fast fruit varieties we've had over the last several